The coffee had gone cold again, which seemed to be the defining characteristic of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's existence aboard Kepler station. She stared at the lukewarm brown liquid with the kind of philosophical resignation usually reserved for contemplating the heat death of the universe. At least the heat death would be exciting. Her current assignment, monitoring deep space communications, felt about as thrilling as watching paint dry in a vacuum. Another thrilling night in paradise, she muttered to her workstation, which responded with its usual mechanical indifference. The array of screens before her displayed the same monotonous patterns they had for the past 6 months: background radiation, stellar wind measurements, and the occasional automated cargo hauler checking in with corporate headquarters. She'd started naming the cargo ships just to keep herself entertained. Tonight's visitor was apparently the SS, probably full of toilet paper again. Sarah reached for her coffee cup, thought better of it, and instead pulled up her personal entertainment files. Maybe she could squeeze in another chapter of that novel about space pirates who were surprisingly good at baking. The universe, she'd concluded, had a twisted sense of humor when it came to her career expectations. The first anomaly appeared at 23:47 station time, a faint blip on her long-range sensors that made her sit up straighter. Unlike the usual mechanical chatter of human vessels, this signal carried something distinctly different, a melodic quality that seemed to pulse with organic rhythm. Sarah frowned, running the signal through her analysis protocols. The computer's response was less than helpful: unknown transmission type, pattern analysis inconclusive, recommend further investigation or consultation with supervisor. "Oh, wonderful advice," Sarah said to the computer. "Why don't I just wake up Commander Harrison at midnight to tell him I found something that sounds pretty? I'm sure he'd love that." She'd learned that talking to the computer helped maintain the illusion of human contact, even if the conversations were decidedly one-sided. The signal grew stronger, and Sarah found herself leaning forward, headphones pressed against her ears. There was something almost hypnotic about the transmission, not quite music, not quite language, but carrying an emotional weight that made her chest tighten with unexplained urgency. The pattern repeated every few minutes, and each repetition seemed more desperate than the last. Against every regulation in the manual and her own better judgment, Sarah began triangulating the signal's origin. The computer identified a small moon in the nearby Epsilon Cygni system, catalogued as EC347b, officially uninhabited and not particularly interesting to anyone, except xenogeologists with too much time on their hands. "Well, EC347b, she said, pulling up the moon's basic data. "Looks like you just became the most exciting thing in my week. That's saying something, considering yesterday I got genuinely excited about a firmware update." The distress, because Sarah was now certain that's what she was hearing, continued for another hour. Each repetition made her more convinced that something was genuinely wrong, and something distinctly non-human was asking for help. The rational part of her brain pointed out that unauthorized investigation missions were excellent ways to end careers, but the larger part of her brain was already plotting a course to the moon. Her supervisor would probably have strong opinions about her decision, none of them complimentary. Commander Harrison was the kind of man who required written reports for coffee breaks and had once spent an entire staff meeting discussing proper procedure for sneezing in the laboratory. But he was also currently asleep in his quarters, and Sarah's conscience was proving remarkably persuasive. "Computer, prepare a reconnaissance shuttle for immediate departure," she said, trying to sound official and failing completely. "Unauthorized mission requires supervisor approval," the computer replied in its maddeningly helpful tone. "Computer, classify this as a routine equipment maintenance flight to nearby celestial body. Classification updated. Shuttle Bay 2 is now available for equipment maintenance mission." Sarah grinned. Apparently, the computer's capacity for creative interpretation matched her own. She gathered her standard exploration kit, medical supplies, portable scanner, emergency rations, and her grandmother's lucky thermos that had accompanied her on every significant journey since graduate school. If she was about to make first contact with alien life, she reasoned, she might as well do it properly caffeinated. The shuttle's engines hummed to life with reassuring efficiency, and Sarah felt the familiar thrill of leaving the station's artificial gravity behind. Space stretched before her, infinite and full of possibilities that didn't involve filing reports about background radiation. The signal grew stronger as she approached EC-347b, its melodic desperation now almost overwhelming in her headphones. The moon's surface appeared deceptively peaceful, gray rock scattered with impact craters, and the occasional crystalline formation that caught starlight like scattered diamonds. Sarah's sensors immediately detected something that shouldn't exist. A metallic signature hidden in a canyon system on the dark side of the moon. Whatever was down there, it was definitely artificial and definitely not human in origin. Well, she said to herself as she began her descent, at least this beats monitoring cargo manifests. The landing site was rougher than she'd hoped, and Sarah's shuttle touched down with less grace than she'd intended. Her grandmother's thermos rattled ominously in its holder, and she made a mental note to check for dents later. The external atmosphere readings confirmed what she'd expected, thin but breathable, with oxygen levels that would sustain human life for several hours. The crashed vessel was unlike anything in human databases, its hull seeming to shift and shimmer in her shuttle's lights. The design was organic, almost grown rather than built, with graceful curves that suggested advanced engineering principles Sarah couldn't begin to understand. Sections of Sarah's medical scanner beeped cheerfully, apparently delighted to have something more interesting to analyze than her usual scraped knuckles and caffeine withdrawal headaches. The alien woman, who had introduced herself as Lyrale with a pronunciation that made Sarah's tongue feel clumsy, sat cross-legged on the shuttle's passenger seat, watching Sarah work with the kind of fascination usually reserved for particularly impressive magic tricks. "Your healing methods are remarkably inefficient," Lyrale observed, tilting her head so her elongated ears caught the shuttle's interior lighting. "Why do you apply external chemicals when you could simply redirect the body's energy patterns?" Sarah paused in her application of antiseptic to one of the glowing burn marks on Lyrale's arm. "Well, mostly because I have no idea what energy patterns are, and redirecting them sounds like something that would either cure everything or accidentally create a black hole. I prefer methods that don't risk destroying solar systems." Lyrale's laugh was musical, literally musical. Sarah could hear harmonic overtones that definitely weren't produced by human vocal cords. "Your species has such delightfully creative approaches to problem solving, very inefficient but charming in its complexity." "Thanks, I think." Sarah finished bandaging the wound, which had stopped glowing ominously and now looked merely like a standard burn. "So you mentioned fleeing from your own people. I'm guessing this isn't about unpaid parking tickets." The alien woman's expression darkened, and her ears flattened slightly against her head. "My people, the Etherian collective, sustain themselves by absorbing emotional energy from other beings. It is our nature, as fundamental as your need for food or sleep. But traditional methods involve taking these emotions without consent, leaving the source depleted and often damaged." Sarah set down her medical supplies, suddenly understanding why Lyrale's presence made her feel oddly calm despite the circumstances. "And you don't approve of the traditional methods, I'm guessing." "I was trained as a healer," Lyrale said, flexing her now bandaged arm experimentally. "My ability allows me to ease suffering by absorbing negative emotions, fear, pain, despair. In return, I would share positive emotions to restore balance. It was symbiotic, beneficial to all parties involved." "Let me guess, your people weren't fans of the whole consent concept." Lyrale's ears twitched in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. Your ability to identify the central problem so quickly is impressive. Yes, the collective views my methods as wasteful. Why ask permission when you can simply take what you need? Why offer reciprocal benefit when one-sided extraction is more efficient? Sarah started working on the shuttle's communication array, which had suffered some damage during her hasty landing. The familiar task of rewiring circuits helped her process what she was learning. So you're basically a refugee from your own species because you believe in ethical emotional consumption. That's either very noble or very inconvenient, depending on your perspective. Both, Lyrale agreed. The inconvenience became significantly more pronounced when the collective decided to make an example of me. They accused me of stealing emotional energy that rightfully belonged to the community, despite the fact that every interaction I had was consensual and mutually beneficial. Politics, Sarah muttered, struggling with a particularly stubborn connection. Same problems everywhere in the universe, apparently. Although I have to admit, your version involves more actual mind reading and less passive-aggressive memo writing. Lyrale moved closer, watching Sarah work with genuine curiosity. May I assist? My understanding of your technology is limited, but I can sense the electrical patterns in your equipment. Sure, but fair warning. If you accidentally turn my shuttle into a sentient being with strong opinions about my life choices, I'm blaming you in the incident report. The alien woman placed her hands near the communication array, and Sarah felt a subtle shift in the air around them. The damaged circuits began functioning again, connections re-establishing themselves with an efficiency that made Sarah's engineering training weep with envy. Your species' approach to technology is remarkably intuitive, Lyrale said. You build tools that complement your natural abilities rather than simply replacing them. Most species abandon such approaches once they achieve advanced technological development. Well, we're probably just too stubborn to admit when we're doing things the hard way. Sarah tested the communication system, which now worked better than it had before the damage. Speaking of hard ways, I should probably contact my station and let them know I'm still alive. My supervisor gets cranky when people disappear without filing proper paperwork. Your social structures fascinate me, Lyrale said, settling back into her seat. Individual autonomy balanced with collective responsibility, but without the rigid hierarchies that characterize most advanced civilizations. How do you maintain order without absolute authority? Sarah laughed, beginning her pre-flight checklist. Mostly through a combination of bureaucracy, caffeine, and collective complaining. It's not perfect, but it keeps us from conquering each other's planets mostly. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and Sarah began plotting a course back to Kepler Station. The return journey would give her time to figure out how to explain her unauthorized rescue mission to Commander Harrison, assuming she could come up with an explanation that didn't sound completely insane. Sarah, Lyrale said suddenly, her voice carrying an urgency that made Sarah's hands freeze on the controls. Your long-range sensors, what do they detect? Sarah checked her displays, and her stomach dropped. 3 ships, sleek and silver, were approaching from the direction of the jump point. They moved with the kind of predatory grace that suggested advanced technology and unfriendly intentions. Let me guess, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Your people found you. Lyrale's ears flattened completely against her head, and Sarah felt a wave of fear that definitely wasn't her own. Etherian pursuit ships. They must have traced my crash landing or detected your shuttle's energy signature when we repaired the communication array. Well, this is just perfect. Sarah began calculating escape vectors, none of which looked particularly promising. Any chance they're here to apologize and offer you a ride home? The collective does not apologize, Lyrale said grimly. They reclaim what they consider stolen property. The alien ships were closing fast, their sleek forms cutting through space with impossible elegance. Sarah's shuttle, designed for research and short-range transport, had about as much chance of outrunning them as a paper airplane had of winning a dogfight with